our Herb Pharm started in 1979, and our founders were herbalists, and so again, they really set out to really make, really the best herbal extracts that they could provide to their customers and to people. Just to, at first, I mean, we still our primary commitment right now is people's health and well-being. So, that's our first focus, and again, just being herbalist, and you have to know the plants themselves, and so working directly with uh, with the plants themselves, it just leads to a really direct relationship. I always say that herbalism and farming they meet at the same crossroads, where they're both really place-based experiences, where you really have to know the herbs you're working with and the land and the environments that they grow in. So those are all important concepts to what we do. And so those really started with us 42 years ago. And so that was really a strong commitment just to the land that we cultivated for growing our herbs in. So it's been a really inherent part of Herb Pharm and our products. Um, I feel like we're probably a little bit set apart from a lot of what makes us really unique is that we grow 80 of our own ingredients. So we cultivate them right here in Oregon. And so when we're able to do that, it just creates quite a difference in quality as far as efficacy and timing. We extract the herbs primarily in certified organic alcohol, but we also do vegetable glycerin for those that are sensitive to alcohol, and we also make salves, so topicals, and also sprays as well. But those all, those all are being done in conjunction with the growing season, with the harvest season. So, which begins as early as March here in Southern Oregon, and just continues on through October. So, a lot of herbalists also, when, before, outside of the commercial industry, you've got a lot of traditional use of plants for used, primarily harvested from the wild. So you've got both stewardship of the land, of wildland, and then also farmland. And so when we adopted, shouldn't I say adopted, but when we actually took on the farming venture side of things, the primary focus was really to improve the health of this land, make sure that we weren't impacting it in a negative way, and just really leaving it better for every generation of farmers. So I wasn't here in 1979. I came in 2007. So I've been here for 15 years. So, but I came in as about the third, fourth generation of farmers. So when I stepped in, there was already a longstanding commitment to organic farming. We were doing organic certified farming before it became, adopted at the federal level. And so we were kind of also pioneering what the organic standards would look like for the rest of the industry, not just herbs, but food as well. And so we got organic certified in the early 90s on this farm. And a lot of the crossover to regenerative were using practices that were kind of, again, foundations in organic farming. But some of the, I would say that, moving more over the last 3-4 years into regenerative farming, it's a little bit more of a stronger commitment. I'll talk about that in a little bit based on some of the programs that we're involved with. Not only that, but it's just, it also enhances some of the types of practices that we might be doing in the field all along, and really making them front and center when you're looking at regenerative farming. So, and I think more to just the last decade or so, what regenerative farming has also offered us and been able to give us an opportunity is really just to take a real clear stance on the impact of climate change on our planet from farming, poor farming practices in particular, and really making a clear vision of how we want to continue to farm and improve our methods, and then also just letting our consumers and other farmers and everyone in the industry know that that this is something that we all need to be committed to at this point if we want to continue with with successful growing seasons.
That's kind of amazing that you guys were not only on the beginning of one of the movements, but two of them, to be going through the organic certification, then of course to be going through regenerative. That must be, kind of great to be the leaders the whole way through over decades.
Yeah, well, it really does stem from, again, our founders, and then at the top, you've really got to have commitment from upper level management, because it's an investment of time, it's an investment of trying new things, and so you have to have that support as well. And but it was probably a little bit easier for us since we already had a lot of regenerative practices in place, such as composting and tree planting and some of the restoration work that we do just on the edges of our field and on the land that we manage, and then also just how we treat our soil in particular. So
Yeah, that was what my next question was going to be, is kind of what specifically are some of those regenerative practices that you guys think are the most important, and what have you felt are your benefits from it? I know you guys do pollinator strips, so of course, the improvement of pollination, but what kind of your high level improvements you guys have seen from the regenerative standpoint?
well, I think again, it all comes down to understanding and gaining a better understanding of the impacts of farming practices, whether it's compaction from your tractors or the decision to rotate crops with cover crops or diversifying your crops. It really comes over time. A lot of it comes through observation for me, just being in agriculture, not just with Herb Pharm for 15 years, but beyond that as well. I learn so much every year just from just seeing the results on the farm itself. But some of these real specific practices, there's quite a lot that can be adopted on your farm, but primarily, of course, regenerative farming again is about enhancing your soil's biology, enhancing the life of your soil. Really making sure that your soil is not going the other direction, and that you're creating basically dead zones in your field, or creating compaction, or in the end, releasing a lot of the carbon that's stored in your soil as well. So we, the primary, I think, focus again for me is always going to be looking at your soil, and making sure that you're making those biological improvements, and that can be simply just looking at organic matter, making sure that your organic matter is increasing over time, and so that you are sequestering carbon. That's kind of an easy, primal. That's kind of a primary focus for myself as a farmer. And then the steps to do that, there's a lot of different techniques that we'll use, and they're not. I've really tried hard to not make it overly complicated. So to really make it simple, you can really look at just some really easy methods of increasing organic matter in your soils. And of course, just two right off hand would be the incorporation of compost, and then the incorporation of cover cropping into our farming practices, which again are practices that we've always used. Sometimes we've used we've taken some years off of maybe not composting every single year since our very beginning. Cover cropping has always been played an important role in our farm, mostly because we're in the wet Pacific Northwest, and so you really have to be careful in the wet winters not to lose a lot of your work, a lot of your topsoil to the heavy rains that we get. So we do get a lot of erosion in the winter with the amount we get a lot of heavy rain during the winter months. But yeah, getting that biological matter back in, incorporating that, and then nurturing those areas of the farm just to really enhance our fields, enhance our soil biology. We see the results in the crops, but you have to actually see the results in the texture and the nature of your soil over time. So I can get into some more specifics of that. Of course, I think some of that also leads to an important, what I consider also an equally important part of farming is ecological diversity, biological diversity. So whether you're looking at, the diversity of underground life or above ground life, or just the soil, or the areas around the edges of your farm, those are all really crucial parts to a healthy farm. In my opinion, it's something that needs, it's really probably one of the most crucial times in our history of, I guess what you'd call, and it's a short history of modern agriculture, where, we really have to turn the corner back to repairing a lot of damage that was done to the landscape, mostly through industrial farming. But, we've removed so much habitat, so much critical habitat, and it's really affecting not just, it's not going to just affect the health of your farm, but it's affecting the health of of the entire planet. So to be able to farm more in conjunction with the habitat that is native to your farm, I think is another crucial part to that. So there's a lot of steps to that we take. The participating in an actual program like regenerative organic certification really solidifies a lot of those concepts, and then kind of holds you to them. So it's a little different than just talking about these practices or maybe trying them. You're more or less graded on them annually through an on-site audit, and then there's a lot of resources that come along with that too, and in the program as well, as far as education around how to implement these on your own farm. So like I said, the easiest ones to start with, and it seems like the most foundational ones to organic farming that cross over into regenerative, would be things like composting and cover cropping, which aren't necessarily requirements of organic certification, but they are of regenerative organic certification. And we've really changed our reliance on, it's changed the way that you look at your soil fertility versus, okay, let's analyze the nutrients in our soil, and let's purchase these organic nutrients and try to balance out all the nutrients in our soil. But understanding that, a little further down the line, that, these nutrients do need to be digested by the organisms to make them available to plants. You need a healthy biome soil, in your soil, to consume these nutrients, and that, most of the nutrients that plants need are already naturally present in your soil. So if you can encourage healthy populations of microbial life in your soil, it's going to transfer into healthy plant nutrition and crop nutrition as well. So one thing that we really, see as a benefit to us is the incorporation of compost. We basically have made a really strong commitment to 100% across the board, make sure that we can create enough compost on our farm. So we pre-plant every rotation of crop into application of compost before we put our plants in the ground. We direct seed some of our crops, but we do a lot of transplanting of young seedlings as well. And the compost is great because it can be used, as a pre-plant incorporation for fertility and nutrients, but it can also, you can make a tea from it that we can use in our greenhouses and apply to our seedlings or apply to the crops later in the growing season. It can be applied to some of our gardens outside of our farm area. So it plays a lot of different roles, and we can also not just use our compost in our fields, but then we can start to incorporate it into our potting soil blends that we use in our propagation of our crops. So there's a lot of great, there's a really just a great utilitarianism that comes with making compost, where you can just, you've got this really concentrated living life force that really you can use to inoculate many parts of your farm. So, and
Compost
then,
really does a lot for us, doesn't it?
yeah, and then of course getting into cover cropping, I would say that again, that we've always been strongly committed to protecting our soils during the winter months. But there's also, what I've learned with cover cropping over time is there's a lot of benefits to diversifying your cover crops, where we used to maybe just plant, a legume and a grain, maybe one or two species. We've really, some of our blends are up to 17 different species in our cover crop blends. And what I see our cover crop fields really playing an important role, again, is getting back to the ecology of your farm, the ecological role of cover crops. It's really habitat for your farm as well. Our cover crop stands tend to grow really thick and dense, and that's where you can really get into the farm. One of my favorite things is get people out into our fields of cover crop and just rake my hands across the soil. And you can see all the different levels of decomposition, everything from green living plants down to decaying matter, down to the brown carbon that's going back into your soil. They're all happening at once. And so, we primarily go with a mix of perennials and annuals, but the one thing you see is it's a great refuge for amphibians and reptiles, and then of course a lot of insect diversity as well. When you diversify your cover crops and your crops, again, um, it's one of the really, I think people don't understand when they come visit Herb Pharm, because we have such a high diversity of crops that we grow. Again, we're growing 80 ingredients. So and these are all different from all different types of habitats and all different plant, everything from trees to shrubs to perennials to annuals, all growing at different maturity heights. And all the roots are going down different levels in the soil. So they're creating all kinds of different pores in the soil for the microbes. And just as we know with plants now that we're learning more and more so much about, how the fungal and bacterial populations are really specific to the plants themselves. So we're really seeing it's just I think most people, if you don't understand the science behind it, at least I think we all enjoy diversity as humans on the planet, and as living beings on the planet. I think all life is attracted to being in these diverse areas where you're just seeing a lot of change between between the different life forms and the different habitats. And it's more of just a pleasing experience to the eye, but what's really happening scientifically is also a very important concept to the farm as well.
You talk about all the different layers of trees and shrubs and grasses and all those things. Are you finding that that stuff is also super important to keeping your soils from washing away? Or what would you say is kind of your best player in not letting your soils run away during those rain seasons? Because I'm sure that's something that affects a lot of people in your area.
Yeah, we again, the cover crops for making sure that we don't get a lot of topsoil erosion during the winter months is going to be a lot of our kind of our vigorous growing. I call them cool season crops, because we do get cold enough where we do have to still choose crops that can grow. There's not a lot of plants that will grow in their winter months. A lot of those tend to be cool season grasses. The grasses tend to grow and cover our soils really well. But yeah, of course, trees, the one thing that they provide is just a copious amount of organic matter, free organic matter from above. We, once the trees are maturing, we really don't have to do anything. We don't have to seed or replant or till the soil. We're just getting the leaves that are falling from above from the trees every year. We have a mixture of evergreens and deciduous. So I'm talking about deciduous trees here that lose their leaves, but even evergreen trees shed leaves every year. So we were getting some of that material as well. But especially the deciduous leaves, they're just giving us a full cover of our soils. And one thing that what we do on our farm that we've done on our farm, we continue to kind of expand these areas. We call it alley cropping, where we're growing our crops between rows of trees and shrubs. And so what I've noticed in these areas, in these alley cropped fields or plots that we're growing our herbs in, is not just the benefit of course, getting some protection from erosion, winter erosion, but even more so, just on the opposite end, we get really hot and dry in the summer here. We don't expect rainfall in the primary growing months of July, August, and even into September. So the mulch from the leaves really provide us with quite a bit of water retention, not just from the organic matter that's going into those soils to help hold water, but they really create just a mulch on top that helps with, it just reduces the evaporation. And just from just off the cusp, not getting too scientific, I basically have to water those areas very little, even during the growing season, and the water is reduced by 2 to 3 times, if not more, depending on kind of what point in the season we are and how hot it's getting. But oftentimes we can reduce our water consumption by quite a large amount when we are able to algae crop. And so again, and it's changing the biology of the soil. It also creates these little microclimates for us as well, where it keeps the temperatures cooler. So, which has been crucial for us in, especially in our part of the world. I don't know if it's everybody's got different challenges, I know, when it comes to climate change, but ours particularly has been kind of this ongoing drought. I've started in horticulture in Oregon in 1996, and these last 10 years have been some of the hottest, driest years since I've been working with, in this industry in the Pacific Northwest. And especially last year was a standout year where we had our hottest July on record and our second hottest June on record. And therefore we just had the hottest year on record for the entire planet. So trees keep us cooler, and it's important for the plants that we grow as well. They really benefit from those cooler soils when we really do see these fluctuations, especially when they tend to really spike on the high side. We're seeing temperatures between 110 and 115 degrees for over a week, almost a week or not more, which is very unheard of for this area for that extended period of time. And then just sustaining around 100 degrees or more, or just slightly below throughout most of the primary growing months this season. So the trees really help with that. They retain, again, less evaporation, more water uptake by the plants. And then again, photosynthesis will slow down at those higher temperatures. So our crops do get some shelter from the trees as well.
That's awesome. We live in kind of a microclimate as well because of the system we create around us. Can you see like a distinct difference between, like, maybe if you go to like town or other places that are not ecologically diverse? I'd assume the temperature difference alone is significant between those two things.
For sure, in the urban areas, we're lucky to be about 30 minutes out of an urban center. So, but it's very apparent because we live in a rural area. So when we go, we call it going to town. It's a big trip, and the town is always hotter on a daily temperature during the summer months, in particular, 5 to 10 degrees warmer just because of the pavement and the retention of heat, and then again the vegetative cover really changes quite a bit once you get further into civil, into where the stores and pavement begins. So, but in particular, microclimates, my day-to-day revolves more around, again, these farm locations, whether it's the different field locations on the farm, or we have 3 farm locations within they're not contiguous, but they're just within a small, short driving distance of each other. And every single one of these locations has a specific nuances when it comes to sun exposure and evaporation, soil types. So part of growing such a diversity of crops, we really want to put the plants where they do the best, where it makes most sense to their native habitat. So, for instance, I have one farm that we basically dryland farm it. We don't have water typically in a drought year, which we've been having to irrigate these crops with by middle of summer. So these crops are able to actually grow. A lot of herbs are drought tolerant, thankfully, and they are very a little more adapted than I feel like our food crops. And maybe that has to do more with their genetics being more closely related to the wild. A lot of the plants that we grow haven't been cultivated by humans. They've been mostly wildcrafted or grow naturally in their native habitat. So they haven't adapted too much to the regimens of, high nutrient, high water farming systems. They're pretty resilient, and so they can withstand quite a bit of dry conditions. And many herbs like rosemary and thyme and lavender. They prefer the extremely dry conditions. If the easiest way to kill these plants is to overwater them. So we're lucky in that way. And then of course we have plants that require more water needs, and I have sections of the farm that just tends to hold more water, like we were talking about, has more tree cover, more shade. And so all these kind of micro habitats play into my crop rotation. And that's the nice thing about having a mix of native habitat and farm habitat in one contiguous area. It allows for all that diversity on your farm versus just having a big open field that's exposed to all the elements.
Yeah. I feel like you guys have such a heavy leaning on, permaculture and holistic context. So when we kind of think about, the average farmer and how they're marketing that things are regenerative, what kind of approach have you guys taken to educating the customer on such a complicated subject of biodiversity and nature and all these different things? How are you guys trying to convey that message to consumers, and how is that going?
Well, that's education is it's an ongoing process. It's another inherent part of Herb Pharm, and again, not just because of regenerative agriculture, but because herbalism. Going back to what I said before about those crossroads of herbalism and farming. Another thing that I see oftentimes is that we've we've lost a few generations, or at least one generation of people of farmers and of herbalists. So we're really having to re-educate ourselves on a lot of these concepts. When I didn't grow up on a farm, my grandparents, the funny thing is when I got in agriculture, I got to share. They knew more about what I was doing than my parents did. So because that's the life that they lived. They grew their own food. They had their own livestock herd and things like that. And so, we're having to relearn a lot of these things and teach each other. So it's a lot of communication, of course. My preference is to have, we host a lot of educational events on the farm. We always encourage people to come visit our farm. But one part of, I guess, a bigger program that we've been part of is, we've offered an on-farm internship since our very beginning. It started with just one or two apprentices, and now it's growing to maybe up to 10 intern apprentices, which are, they're getting an education in herbalism, making herbal extracts or different types of herbal products. And then they're also getting the component of learning how of permaculture, regenerative farming, soil biology, propagation. And so that's been a wonderful thing. Of course, with COVID, we've had to take some time off of that just because it's a public program, but we're going to be resuming that in 2022. So we're looking forward to having these more educational opportunities on our farm coming up. And again, me being here for 15 years, I've been able to work with somewhere between about 300 and 400 apprentices. So, and it's great. It's so wonderful to be able to, be a resource for anybody who's interested. So, keeping the communication lines open, and just giving ourselves opportunity to learn always, no matter what. I don't feel like there's any stopping point to sharing knowledge and sharing what we're learning. So, those type of encouraging those type of leaders in the agricultural field, I think, are going to make the difference of handing, the right information, the good information, and the experience really down the line. So, so we do quite a bit of that. And of course, these days it's a lot of, Zoom talks and things like that as well. So, but yeah, we do. And we participate in larger, there's so many great conferences out there as well. So those are all great opportunities. But yeah, I would say I'm just a person that tends to learn the best from from the hands-on experience. So if you can find a farmer in your area that's doing biological farming, or just looks like they have really great soil practices or a lot of diversity, their farm might just look totally different than their neighbor's farm, that might be a good person to go and meet.
Always best to learn hands-on, right?
Yes.
How about the reverse problem? Have you found any kind of major barriers to the explanation, aside from it's not a two-line sentence explanation? What kind of struggles have you guys found in the education portion of it?
Oh yeah. Well, I think scientific communication, again, the science behind regenerative farming can get really complicated when you're linking the farming practices to, something as a microcosm of what's happening just here on my small farm, to the a large global scale environmental problem of climate change. How those impact each other. When it comes to understanding, how carbon is stored in our soils, how it gets released up into the atmosphere, some of the agricultural practices that are contributing to greenhouse gas productions of CO2 and NO2 and methane. So those can be a little more complicated or more elaborate than maybe sometimes we want to sit down and try to figure out, and can be, again, more based on scientific research than actual practices on the ground. So it can be daunting to somebody that wants to just get into regenerative farming practices on their farm. Just to, I would say start first with just really focusing on improving your soil, improving the health of your crop, and the health of your farm habitat, and not to get too overly consumed with these larger concepts of greenhouse gases and changes in our atmosphere and things like that. They're important to understand, but they just may not be as easily communicated to others as some of the concepts that we're just doing right here on our own farm.
Yeah.
The other one I would say is there's also, I think, the opportunity for some new equipment to be done, especially at the mid to maybe larger scale farming. Again, when we're looking at reducing tillage, there's been some great new equipment coming online when it comes to crimper rollers and no-till grain drills, and ways, things that we can do to kind of reduce, if you're using a tractor, any equipment on your fields, some of these new types of designs will help. I think over time, it's just going to take time to develop and kind of perfect these designs to get them to work really well for farmers in the future, versus kind of the old school equipment that most of us will find these days still, cultivators and discs and plows. So making them more available, I think, would be another challenge or another hurdle to cross. And I think again, I think our biggest challenge with all of this is just, it comes from just, again, the story that we're all telling outside of our farm. We really just have to redefine our culture. It's still too easy to go out there and we really want to make sure that we're able to support this, not just as farmers, but as consumers as well. So just making the commitment to, make this more available on the market and the marketplace for consumers, I think is going to be the biggest challenge, because that's really going to make the biggest change is really just, it's going to come through long-term investments in these types of practices.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about the consumers. So what we're watching is a kind of a struggle point for the industry is not a lot of people hear the word regenerative and instinctively know what that means. So we're finding businesses are trying to say it in different words. How are you guys trying to convey that? Are there any words that you are preferring, or how's that on the marketing side?
Yeah, we know on the marketing side, we really do. We probably use a lot of the same outlets nowadays, which is a lot of social media, to try to show, it's a good opportunity not just to explain, but to show photographs and pictures, which are helpful. Yeah, I'd have to say that we've had a lot more movement or success or commitment internally than externally. I don't think we've really gauged as far as how, to the extent that what the potential is for the regenerative consumer market. But what we do know is that we definitely are getting, it's definitely, we're getting a lot more requests for information about wanting to know more about this type of farming, about our soil practices, about our environmental ethics. So, and we're working with a lot more, business partners that are also wanting to make these same commitments. So it is slowly kind of like, as the snowball kind of rolls down the hill, it's just getting bigger and bigger. So it does seem to be moving in that direction. It's not just, it's not explosive growth, but I think just the biggest thing is that when someone comes to us, wanting to know a little bit more about the regenerative organic certification or what our practices are, it's just, it sparks a lot of excitement on our end. So we're able to really share our experiences. And hopefully that just continues to kind of build upon itself the further down the line.
It's really good that you guys are seeing it from a consumer standpoint, because that's kind of how we feel the movement's being driven by the inside, and we're finally starting to see it a little bit in the consumer. And regenerative, I'm glad you brought up the regenerative organic certification. I kind of wanted to dive into, there being great drivers of the movement. How was that certification process and how did that evolve?
Well, it was stemmed from our leadership. I know our CEO was the first one that kind of found the opportunity to get involved with the program, and came to me as far as the farmer and said, "Is this something that that we might be interested in? Is this something that we might want to pursue and learn more about?" And I would have to honestly say my first reaction was in the first 24 hours, I didn't quite. Even more than that, it took me a little time to work out the distinction between organic and regenerative organic, because they are so closely related. And again, just understanding, I had to delve more into the history of organic farming to really understand more about the foundation of the organic movement, especially in the United States, and see how it's related, and maybe how some of that has slowly eroded over time, and how we could bring those concepts back onto the farms. And then, of course, the certification portion of this through the regenerative organic certification, that was a no-brainer, just because of some of the stakeholders in that, being Rodale Institute and agronomists that have just dedicated their whole life to teaching people how to improve their soil, NRCS, and just different like-minded companies that I hold with high ethical values. So, a lot of the board members and the folks that developed this program, I knew we're going to do a good job from the get-go and be really honest with themselves and make improvements. So we were part of the initial year pilot program, which was the time to trial the standards of the regenerative organic certification, and then make the refinements. I was just a participating farm, so I got to give my feedback. It was ultimately the certification board that decided to make any changes as far as what was obtainable, which ones made the most sense. But it is a very in-depth program, and it's one that I would I always, especially at our level, but I would say at any level, it creates a template for your farm, and it brings everybody together with a common vision. So the certification process is something that we can all work towards. And farming, again, everybody has their own unique style of doing it. No two farmers kind of have the same techniques all the time, and everybody has their nuances. So working, it's not just me out here farming. I've got 30 other farmers and apprentices, and we all have our ideas and philosophies on how this should be done. And so bringing it all together under the regenerative organic certification is it's a really mutual agreeable point where you can really have some really tangible parts to building, building your soil over time, especially, but also making some changes uh, to how the just basically your work environment on the farm too. There's really three elements of the certification: it's soil health, it's livestock welfare, and then worker fairness. So because we don't raise any livestock on our farm and we just primarily grow herbs, we don't apply any of the standards to the livestock, but the soil standards and the worker fairness part of the program are very in depth and very it's I like it because again it brings us back to the education point. It's a tri-level certification, so if you meet the baseline requirements you can get certified, but you're working your way through bronze, silver, and then to the gold standard. And the gold standard of regenerative farming it really is something, there's every step of the way, each standard, there's improvements to be made. Whether you're implementing those practices and can just broaden them out, or do them on a broader sense throughout your entire farm, or just taking on more practices. So, but yeah, it's really, and it really solidifies again, looking at some more of the concrete examples of the certifications. It doesn't just take these concepts of compost and cover cropping and saying, okay, I'm doing these things, so the health of my farm is improving. It is really looking at the health of your soil, not just through a farmer lens, but through a analytical lab analysis too. So the soil component requires soil testing at an analytical lab. And it's different than how farmers would traditionally test their soil for nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium. You're looking at completely different components of your soil that has to do with the life components of your soil, how much oxygen is available, what the respiration rate of your soil is, the protein levels, the food sources for your microorganisms, and then your overall organic matter. pH also plays an important part to a healthy microbiome. So all these concepts are happening over time through the program. So you're seeing just not only results on your farm, but you're seeing results through a lab too on some of these practices. And then of course there's just basic standards that need to be met, that necessarily aren't part of the organic certification program. You can't remove trees or clear native vegetation to create new fields. There's biological soil testing that takes you into your field and makes you look more closely at your soil, where you do these tests on your farm. So it's not all done through an analytical lab as well. One of the more fun parts of the program is you go out and every year and you go in, and the thing is these are really based on GPS coordinates. So it's not like you can just choose farmers know where their best soils are. They know where their crops grow the best. So it's not like you can cheat and just go to those places every year. Everything's tracked over time through GPS coordinates. So you're going back to these same places and seeing these changes over time, whether they're good or bad. And the biological soil testing is fun because you get to dig in your soil and really, you're counting the number of visual macroorganisms. You get to float soil and water and see how quickly it dissolves, because the more you till, you break, organic matter is like glue when it works in your soil, so it binds your soil together better. If you're over tilling or overworking your soil tends to be less stable as far as it's called aggregate stability. And yeah, you take a transect, 10 feet transect, and go across and count how much cover you have in your fields. And so there's all these great little things you can do on your farm as well. And then there's just really some hard standards when it comes to meeting the cover crop and the vegetative cover, making sure that your soil is always covered with some sort of vegetation year round. So there's quite a bit in the soil component as well. And minimizing your soil disturbance, of course. You don't want to build all that great topsoil and destroy it through tillage or overworking your soil. So it's a challenging program. It makes farmers look, it's self-reflection is never easy. I think it's one of the hardest things any of us can choose, no matter what you do. And that's what this program really does. It makes you kind of reflect on your practices and how to make those improvements. And I couldn't ask for, a better challenge than that. So those are parts that I've enjoyed. And then of course, being outside of a farmer, I love botany, I love biology. So it really brings in all these other concepts of biological diversity. There's a strong component on conservation, especially in the more sensitive areas of our farms. If we have riparian areas or wetlands, forested areas, there's all types of regenerative practices outside of farming, during the off season that you could be doing to enhance your native habitat, or expanding on your native habitat on your farm as well, and integrating that more back into your agricultural practice. So I really enjoy that part of it. And then the worker fairness component as well. It's a really something that, again, we're at that tipping point in agriculture where the shift needs to be made for, the way that farm workers are leveraged in the industry itself. The people that are really out there doing the work every day. We're out there, everybody from, it really creates leadership teams. It's really, this certification program encourages, it's not like upper level management. You really have to create teams within your farm. And you have to be really transparent about a lot of things that have plagued, unfortunately, modern day agriculture for a long, long time, that it needs to be changed as well. If we're gonna support regenerative soil, regenerative agriculture, and the market, we need to create these healthy, workplaces and communities for our workers. So everything from living wages to disclosure of your policies when it comes to hiring, and any sort of worker voice empowerment. And part of the audit is when we get our annual audit, it's they'll sit down with each worker or a few workers on the farm, and just have have a one-on-one with them, because oftentimes that's not available to a lot of workers on farms either, is they don't have a lot of representation on farms where it is heavy top management down. So, and that could lead to a lot of issues. So I'm thankful for that. I've always worked for a really progressive company here at Herb Pharm, that we've stayed ahead of that curve all this time, and we've always been strongly committed to everybody who's part of our family here, our workers. But that's not to say stepping outside of here, there's a lot of issues in agriculture still with how workers are being treated.
I think that's a really beautiful point you kind of make about, we take the holistic context of how we want to farm, but that also goes up the chain of how we treat others who are part of our business. I think it's a really nice part that's conveyed through the movement. And I always like hearing that continues to convey, and it's not, you guys didn't have to overthrow the system. There was already, some stuff that maybe needed to be tweaked, but, fairness was always an important part as well.
Yeah, my hope is that regenerative farming not only, again, in the context of that would just be, beyond just soil practices and farming practices. The big, what I'd really like to see is, our agriculture communities, our farming communities come back together in a healthy way, and, and in a more, cooperative way that it's just going to help, I think, again, just repair so much of some of the wake of the damage that, kind of industrial agriculture has trampled through so much of our systems on those things, because it's all, those are all part of this web. And so it's important.
It's so true. And Something I want to ask your opinion on, if there is somebody who is kind of maybe doing this in their backyard or as a hobby, what's your kind of advice to how do they turn this into something that's their full-time passion? Because we need more people that are like this, that are so excited about the movement. What would your advice be to help them continue doing that?
Well, I would say, and this is of any farmer, whether you're big or small, and again, we talked a lot about diversity, but really, diversify. These days, you really have to. The more things you can do on your farm, and I'm not just talking about um, crop diversity, but I am. So, have a diverse set of plants that you're working with, or livestock. Find those niches, and but not just that, diversity as far as what you're offering from your farm, and the and and the type of farm anything. Farming traditionally was always, to me, it was like rolling hills and the red barn on top of the hill, and you just saw endless, the healthy cows out in grass pastures. But I mean, nowadays farming could be happening, a lot of on rooftops and in the middle of urban cities, and in suburban areas, and that's really going to be the change that needs to happen. So that doesn't look anything like what I guess the typical, agricultural system has been over the last 50 years in the United States. So it is going to fall to the small producers, to the small farmers. And I guess one advice to that, because I think everybody struggles with the margins on farming, because it is a lot of labor. And when I started organic farming, this was before Herb Pharm, it was almost like a lifestyle choice. Like I had to choose to be poor to be a farmer. But I always eat really good, and I have the best friends, and we all trade each other for really healthy foods and a healthy lifestyle. But it sure would be nice to have a lot of the other benefits that modern day careers offer. So I would say, in that sense, you do have to be savvy with we still live in a capitalistic economy, and you have to be cognizant of that. So with the margins being so close on the raw material side, the consumers in the United States, we don't necessarily value or place a high value on these raw materials. We can still buy fruits and vegetables that are fairly low cost compared to a lot of other things when you make products out of them. So I always encourage farmers to look at ways to add value to what they grow, or what they produce. And that's just an important concept to be able to stay economically viable too. Is take those tomatoes and come up with 10 different products you can make from those tomatoes, and see which one you would enjoy the most and offer that. And it's just the way that our economy works right now. We value products more than the raw materials. So that'll also help your bottom line, I think, in the end.
That's such a great piece of advice, because I think a lot of people do struggle with that mindset of, producing and farming is not inherently a get rich quick scheme, but we all love it so much. How can we let that passion? So I think that's a really, really great way to help people go about that a little bit better. And my last question for you is, so what is ahead for Herb Pharm? So, you're talking about having interns back on the farm. What's ahead for you guys?
Yeah, well, I think from my perspective, it is going a little bit. Again, I always advocate, because I have been for so long in my lifetime, just how to create more green jobs, green markets, all these things we're talking about. How do we create more of it and make this more of an option for people that are wanting to either make a career change, or they're just coming into their careers for the first time. How do we make these opportunities more available? And so, of course, I'm driven by the fact that the more we can drive our business, the more we can drive these types of opportunities for people. And I think one of the one of the things that we're seeing is, at least I am, which is pretty exciting, is that we've kind of turned this corner into, which is now we're starting to get into this idea that, there's so many uses that plants and the soil and our environment just provides us with that are just, they're so crucial to not only our survival, but just our well-being, that I think there's a shift that's happening. And we're seeing that, not just, hopefully in the land itself, but in the marketplace too, where we're seeing just, so many of these different plants and diversity of natural products and beverages and health products, and so much of a swing back towards wanting to connect with, again, with the land, with all these other beings that are around us, all this life that we have surrounding us that, are just critical to to our existence on this wonderful planet. So, the more that we can do all this together, that's the exciting part. So I think with us looking ahead, we're going to continue to just, we're so lucky to have such a foundation in this type of lifestyle and these type of quality products with our founders and our owners, original, founders of the company, that all we really have to do at Herb Pharm is take that and just kind of spread the word. And that's what we've been doing for 42 years. And so hopefully we can, uh, we're going to continue to do that for a very long time.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job of it. So I guess we're just excited to see it keep going and keep spreading.
Thanks, Lauren. Really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you so much, Matt. We appreciate you being on here so much. And do you mind just letting everybody know what's the best place to find you guys online, your social media?
Yeah, sure. Social media, Instagram, Facebook, just be under Herb Pharm. And then again, if you just Google Herb Pharm, it's herb-pharm.com as our website, and you'll find a lot of information, not only of our business and our products, but quite a bit about our farm as well, and some really great photographs as well in all these places. So yeah, definitely check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Matt. We appreciate you so much and can't wait to keep sharing what you guys keep doing in the future.
Thanks, Lauren.